11 combative strip club customers. In April 2023, police officers were driving through the parking lot of an El Paso strip club in search of illegal activity. They noticed something fishy and approached two people who were sitting in a car. They asked 29-year-old Damien Ars to step out of the vehicle so they could investigate for suspected marijuana use, but he allegedly tried to speed off. The vehicle struck a police car and several other vehicles and dragged the officers. As police struggled with Ars and a woman in the passenger seat, who was later identified as 27-year-old Taisha Mullen, another driver allegedly revved his engine and drove toward the officers as if he planned to hit them. The reckless motorist managed to flee the scene and the car was later found abandoned. Authorities charged Damien Ars with 2 counts of aggravated assault against a public servant and 1 count of resisting arrest, while Taisha Mullen faces 1 count of assault against a public servant and 1 count of resisting arrest. Police also arrested the man who's accused of taunting the cops by revving his engine and driving towards them. 29-year-old Cantrell James Miller was charged with 1 count of aggravated assault against a public servant. 10. Trevor Bigfoot. All hell broke loose during the famous New Year's Eve celebration in Times Square at the end of 2022. A man from Maine identified as 19-year-old Trevor Bigfoot allegedly attacked NYPD officers with a large machete. He's accused of swinging the blade at several officers, slashing 2 of them in the head, and leaving rookie cop Paul Consolino with a fractured skull on his very first shift. Another rookie officer stopped the attack by shooting the suspect in the shoulder. Consolino was in good spirits as he received stitches at the hospital, according to New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who paid the newly sworn officer a visit and commended him for his life-saving actions during his first day on the job. 8-year veteran Officer Louis Iorio also received treatment for a laceration to the head, and Bigfoot was taken to the emergency room for his gunshot wound. Bigfoot had traveled to New York City by train a few days before the attack and was camping out at a park in Queens. In his bag, investigators found a handwritten note to his mother and other relatives, stating that he didn't feel like a good enough person and encouraging her to accept Allah. It was one of the first signs that Bigfoot had been radicalized and that the attack was terroristic in nature. According to ABC News, the young man's mother and aunt had harbored the same fears about his beliefs and had even reported their suspicions to the FBI. Among Bigfoot's possessions, police found a diary containing entries about how he felt let down by his family. Based on the writings, it appears as though he held anti-government and anti-military views and saw his brother as an enemy for serving in the armed forces. Photos from shortly before Bigfoot's transition to Islamic extremism show a seemingly all-American flannel-wearing teen with an innocent boy-next-door look. The recent high school graduate was reportedly a talented athlete and artist with honor roll grades. According to the New York Times, his personality began to change after his father's death a few years before the attack, but he'd only recently become radicalized. He allegedly came to believe that the US government is anti-Muslim and committed himself to waging jihad on domestic soil after his plans to travel to Afghanistan and join the Taliban fell through. Investigators believe that Bigfoot planned on dying during the attack in Times Square in hopes of achieving martyrdom. He's reportedly disappointed that everyone involved in the confrontation survived and considers his mission a failure. While the investigation is ongoing, the evidence so far suggests that the teen acted alone and that he wasn't a member of any terrorist groups. Bigfoot faces multiple state-level charges, including 2 attempted murder counts and several assault and attempted assault charges. He was also federally charged with 4 counts of attempted murder of officers and employees of the US government and persons assisting them. 9. Simone Reiner Kim. A Philadelphia-bound Frontier Airlines flight was waiting on the tarmac at Miami International Airport one day in early 2023 when an argument broke out between 2 passengers. Footage of the confrontation showed a woman repeatedly threatening to beat up a male passenger. It's unclear what their disagreement was about, but at some point during the clip, the woman could be heard saying, "You're not even from Philly." After a civilian and a crew member tried unsuccessfully to intervene in hopes of de-escalating the situation, the angry female passenger was ordered off the plane. Later identified as 24-year-old Simone Reiner Kim of Killeen, Texas, she allegedly refused to exit the aircraft, prompting the crew to get the police involved. According to law enforcement, Kim became combative as 4 officers struggled to remove her from the plane. She's accused of pushing, pulling, kicking, scratching, and biting the cops, and nearly knocked one of them over. In a video captured by a passenger, Kim could be seen flailing as the officers carried her to a squad car and put her inside. She faces 3 felony charges, including 2 counts of battery on a police officer and 1 charge of resisting an officer with violence. Kim was also charged with several misdemeanors, including 3 counts of assault on an officer and 1 trespassing count. What would you do if someone who was waiting to board the same flight as you began behaving in ways that made you feel unsafe, but staff members didn't see a strong enough reason to stop the person from flying? 8. Candy thief takes on London cops. The London Metropolitan Police Department found itself at the center of widespread mockery in 2023, when footage of a woman taking on 2 cops at once went viral. According to some reports, the 26-year-old suspect was accused of stealing candy from a newsstand, while police later claimed that they responded to the scene over allegations that she had assaulted 3 people. As a growing crowd formed at the scene with their cell phone cameras rolling, the suspect could be seen grabbing one officer's ponytail and swinging her around by her hair. She appeared to handle the cop with ease, despite being in a pair of flip-flops and outnumbered by the responding officers. In one part of the video, she effortlessly pushed away a male officer before shoving a female officer into him. The woman stormed off down the street, but was chased down by the officers as several more cops arrived at the scene to help with the takedown. A second clip that appeared online showed an entire group of officers surrounding the suspect as they subdue her into custody. In a statement, the Metropolitan Police accused the woman of continuing to act aggressive after her arrest and racially abusing the arresting officers. She allegedly assaulted another member of law enforcement while in custody and broke their nose. The crazed candy thief was placed on a mental health hold, and it's unclear what became of the case. 7. Davey and Chromatie. During the afternoon of July 14, 2023, officers in Louisville, Kentucky's metro area responded to a domestic disturbance report from a woman who said her boyfriend refused to leave her house and that she wanted him removed. According to an arrest report, 23-year-old Davey and Chromatie answered the door and tried to push his way through officers when he saw his girlfriend standing outside. Officers tried unsuccessfully to put Chromatie in handcuffs, and their attempts to take him to the ground also failed. During the struggle, Chromatie allegedly wrapped his legs around an officer's neck and tried to strangle him. Fearing for his life, the officer reached for his gun. Chromatie is accused of pulling on the cop's arm in an attempt to take the weapon. As a second officer rushed over to help her colleague and prepared to deploy her taser, the woman who dialed 911 allegedly jumped on her back and hit her twice in the face. Thankfully, the officer managed to maintain her grip on the taser. As the chaos continued to unfold, Chromatie ran from the scene, damaging a parked vehicle as he fled. Police arrested him later that night when he tried returning to the residence. He faces a multitude of charges, including 2 counts of assault on a police officer and 1 count each of wanton endangerment, disarming a peace officer, fleeing the police, criminal mischief, and violating a protective order out of Virginia. The female suspect, Daria Collins, was charged with assault, attempting to disarm a peace officer, and obstructing governmental operations. 6. Dennis Campbell. To help make safety education a little more entertaining for children, the Kankakee, Illinois Police Department has a mascot named Safety Pup, who often makes appearances at local events. In July of 2023, an officer was tasked with donning the Super Pup costume at a children's event at the Kankakee Public Library. not only to make the kids happy, but because it gives the cops an opportunity to place an incognito officer in plain sight to keep an eye on things. Because Super Pup is the police department's mascot, it would be natural to think that a cop is wearing the costume, but people apparently don't always stop to think about who's behind the disguise. At around 10:30 in the morning during the event, the costumed officer stepped outside the library and was suddenly struck in the back of the head. Witnesses claimed that the blow was so forceful that the officer lost her balance and nearly fell to the ground. According to a police report, she immediately turned around and saw the suspect, 61-year-old Dennis Campbell, mumbling incoherently. She quickly removed the head of the mascot costume and revealed that she was a police officer. Campbell allegedly said that he didn't know that the person inside the costume was a police officer, which still begs the question of why he apparently thought it was okay to hit Super Pup and what his reason was for doing so. He was charged with aggravated battery to a police officer and was released from jail after posting a $100,000 bond. 5. Elias Villarreal. While responding to a call about a verbal dispute between a man and a woman at an intersection in Kyle, Texas in early 2022, police officers spotted a man wielding a metal pipe. Later identified as 63-year-old Elias Villarreal, the suspect jumped over a fence and struck a patrol vehicle multiple times with the pipe despite repeated orders to stop, causing significant damage to the car. Officers used a stun gun to subdue Villarreal, but it failed to stop him from confronting the cops with the pipe. He turned away briefly and an officer tackled him to the ground and attempted to disarm him. Villarreal struck the cop with the pipe, causing minor injuries, and was charged with aggravated assault against a public servant and resisting arrest with a deadly weapon. He was found guilty on both counts. According to the Hays County District Attorney, Villarreal refused to accept responsibility for his actions and said he had no regrets about the incident. The judge sentenced him to 35 years in prison, setting the example that violence against law enforcement will not be tolerated in Hays County. Villarreal will be 98 years old if and when he sees freedom again. Showing remorse for one's actions or a lack thereof can go a long way in an American courtroom, and it's probably safe to assume that Villarreal's attitude played a significant role in the judge's sentencing decisions. But it's unclear whether the unusually stiff sentence has anything to do with Villarreal's lengthy criminal record, which include previous convictions for voluntary manslaughter, forgery, burglary of a vehicle, and 2 felony family violence-related assault charges. Prior to his most recent run-in with the law, he'd served a 28-year sentence for his crimes. 4. Cameron Batson. During the early morning hours on New Year's Eve in 2022, Atlanta police officers pulled over a suspected drunk driver who was speeding and failing to stay in their lane. The man behind the wheel was identified as 27-year-old Cameron Batson, a member of the Atlanta Falcons practice squad. According to law enforcement, Batson was too drunk to drive. He allegedly resisted violently when officers tried taking him into custody, prompting one cop to fire his gun. Nobody was struck by the bullet, and Batson managed to escape long enough to get in his truck and drive off. He didn't make it very far, though. After crashing the truck during a brief chase, Batson ditched the vehicle and attempted to flee on foot. Officers tracked him down nearby and took him to the hospital for his injuries before hauling him off to jail. He was charged with assault, battery, aggravated assault on an on-duty law enforcement officer, removing a weapon from a public official, and driving while fleeing a police officer. Batson's football career was already lagging at the time of his arrest. After being let go from the Tennessee Titans, he signed on with the Falcons. Less than 3 months later, he was demoted to the practice squad. After his arrest, he posted $95,000 bail and received permission from a judge to travel for work. But the judge's blessing wasn't needed because Batson was let go from the practice squad later that day. He remains a free agent for the time being. Sometimes, when a person isn't in their right mind, they behave in extremely regrettable ways, especially when liquid courage is involved. 3. Makaya Coleman. An airport security checkpoint in Phoenix, Arizona erupted into chaos one early morning in April 2023 when a young woman allegedly attacked TSA agents for taking away her apple juice. As most travelers know, travelers are not allowed to bring drinks past security at airports. In accordance with standard protocol, agents removed 19-year-old Makaya Coleman's beverage as she passed through the checkpoint. According to court documents, Coleman began ranting and raving about the juice and attempted to walk past a barrier to grab a bin of her belongings that was being searched. The young woman is accused of climbing over a table and striking an agent in the head before punching another agent multiple times and pulling their hair. She allegedly bit a third agent who was trying to intervene. Two of the agents required hospital treatment, and the altercation caused congestion among travelers as the checkpoint was shut down to deal with the situation at hand. In a statement, a TSA spokesperson said that roughly 450 people had to deal with the inconvenience of being redirected to another security checkpoint. Coleman faces 6 federal charges, including 3 counts of assaulting a federal officer resulting in bodily injury, and 3 counts of interference with airport security screening personnel. If convicted on 1 count of the assault charge alone, she could face up to 20 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. 2. Daniel Rodriguez. On January 6, 2021, a 2,000-strong mob of Donald Trump supporters violently stormed the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C., in hopes of overturning the recent election of now President Joe Biden. The property incurred millions of dollars worth of damage and at least 138 police officers were injured. Over 1,000 suspects were charged in connection with the riot, and as of July 2023, more than 600 rioters have pleaded guilty, and at least 100 have been convicted in jury trials. One of the stiffest punishments was dealt to 40-year-old Daniel Rodriguez, who drove from California to DC to participate in the rebellion. Described by a federal judge as a one-man army of hate, Rodriguez was accused of going on a more than 2-hour-long campaign of assaults against responding members of law enforcement. He allegedly sprayed a fire extinguisher in officers' faces, shoved a wooden pole at cops, and teamed up with other demonstrators in an effort to force their way through police lines. Prosecutors also claimed that Rodriguez struck Metro DC officer Michael Fanone twice in the neck with an electroshock device while he responded to law enforcement's request for assistance. From there, the unruly protester entered the Capitol and continued along his path of destruction, ransacking officers and working to keep other rioters riled up. When it came time to face the music in court, Rodriguez's lawyers claimed that their client had been fooled by Donald Trump's false claims of the election being rigged. They blamed the defendant's loyalty to Trump on daddy issues and other facets of a troubled childhood, writing in a court document that Rodriguez saw Trump as the father he never had. But Rodriguez himself did not behave like someone who wanted sympathy from the court. During his proceedings, he reportedly reflected on the time leading up to the riot with a nostalgic fondness, depicting it as a time of bonding between people who shared his beliefs and criminal intentions. In explaining his actions, Rodriguez simply said, "I did what I thought was right at the time." He implored the judge for leniency, but was handed a stiff 12-year federal prison term. As he exited the courtroom, he smiled and yelled, "Trump won," at which point any benefit of the doubt being extended toward him likely went straight out the window. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. 1. Machete-wielding man v NYPD. While patrolling outside the Department of Motor Vehicles in Brooklyn's Coney Island neighborhood one afternoon in May of 2022, NYPD officer John Faval noticed 2 men fighting over a parking spot. As Faval approached the scene, the disgruntled driver hopped out of his vehicle and charged at the officer with a knife. The officer put distance between himself and the driver, later identified as 57-year-old Richard Paris, while bystanders alerted other cops nearby. Paris allegedly rushed at Faval again, prompting the other officers to draw their guns. They ordered the suspect to drop the weapon, but he continued to chase after Faval with the knife in his hand. One of the officers shot at Paris 4 times, striking him in the leg and shoulder. One witness told the New York Daily News that even after being shot, Paris remained combative. She described hearing the suspect yelling at the cops to get off him while they struggled to handcuff him. Another woman said that she saw Paris acting crazy while Villarreal tried to figure out what was going on with the parking dispute. She told the Daily News that she and her friend ran the moment they heard gunfire and didn't look back. Villarreal suffered a deep cut to his thumb from the machete and was treated at a nearby hospital for his injuries. Paris was also taken to an emergency room and survived his injuries. During a search of the suspect, police reportedly found 2 knives in his possession, one with a 6-inch blade and another with an 11-inch blade, with one bystander describing it as looking like a sword. The altercation could have had a much worse outcome if it weren't for the quick-thinking officers who sprang into action to stop a potentially deadly assault from happening. The city's top cops praised Villarreal and his colleagues for their handling of the situation. News reports claim that Paris was angry because he felt like he had dibs on a parking space when someone else took it. It's something that pretty much anyone who drives in the Big Apple has experienced at one point or another, and while it's certainly frustrating, most people don't try to resolve these disagreements with violence. Paris was charged with assault on a police officer, 2 counts of attempted assault, 2 counts of menacing a police officer, and 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon.
Number 16. James Matt French. In March 2023, a police officer was patrolling the streets in Oklahoma City at 2 a.m. when he noticed an SUV speeding and swerving between lanes. He followed the car as it turned into a subdivision without a turn signal and conducted a traffic stop as it slowly pulled into a driveway. Behind the wheel was an off-duty police captain named James Matt French, who was a 32-year veteran of the force. The officer on duty observed a distinct smell of alcohol as he spoke with French and noticed that the captain's eyes were glassy and his speech was very slurred. In a conversation that was caught on body cam footage, French identified himself and said he was on his way home after having a few beers at a poker game. He asked the arresting officer to turn his body camera off multiple times, but the officer refused and said he was not going to give the man any special treatment. French performed poorly on all of the field sobriety tests and was taken into custody on suspicion of DUI. He was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of his criminal case and an internal investigation. Oklahoma City Police Chief Wade Gawley declined to go into detail about why he thought French requested that the officer turn his body camera off, but praised the cop's professionalism in handling the situation. The case is ongoing, so we'll have to wait for the outcome. Number 15. Stephen Jones. 34-year-old father of 2 Stephen Jones was working as a police sergeant in northern Wales when he decided to start cheating on his wife, 37-year-old Madeline Jones, with a local barmaid back in 1992. He completely lost interest in his marriage during the excitement of the affair, but he wasn't interested in the potential costs of a divorce and believed that leaving Madeline would ruin his chances for a promotion at work. So, to avoid this, late one night in early 1993, Jones lured his wife into their garage by pretending her brother had a heart attack. He then killed her with a single blow to the head using his police baton and put a garbage bag over her face to stop blood from getting everywhere. Jones loaded his wife's dead body into her car, drove it down an embankment, and right into a tree. He then placed the corpse in a nearby stream to make it look like Madeline had flown through the windshield in a car accident. Someone quickly saw the car and called the police. It happened so fast that Jones had no time to get rid of the evidence at his house before his colleagues came by to comfort him. By then, investigators at the scene were already finding suspicious signs that the crash was staged. Jones, who stood over a foot taller than his wife, forgot to pull the seat back up before placing Madeline behind the wheel. She was way too short to have been driving the car with the seat set so far back. Even before an autopsy was performed, forensic detectives noticed that Madeline's head injuries were inconsistent with those of a typical car accident. And there was also no glass in her hair, making it highly doubtful that she went through the windshield. In the trunk of Jones's car, police found his police helmet, which he wore to prevent injury when he crashed Madeline's car. They also found a bloody baton that he had used to kill her. He had taken out multiple life insurance policies on his wife and stood to gain tens of thousands of dollars from her death. It may not sound like much in today's standards, but it was a substantial amount of money 30 years ago. Luckily, he was arrested and charged with Madeleine's murder before he could cash it all in. During his trial, Jones claimed Madeleine died after simply falling and hitting her head. He said he panicked and staged the accident out of fear that he would be blamed for her death. Prosecutors, on the other hand, accused Jones of a cold and calculated murder, saying that he used his police experience to his advantage in his cover-up attempt. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 14. Nicholas Tartaglioni. In 2008, former law enforcement officer Nicholas Tartaglioni retired from the Briarcliff Manor Police Department in New York after suffering an injury. He spent the next few years living on a quiet ranch in Otisville, about 70 miles north of New York City. During that time, he secretly started running a drug ring with the help of Joseph Biggs, a bodybuilder who worked for Tartaglioni as an enforcer, and Gerard Benderoth, a retired NYPD officer and bodybuilder who also added muscle to the operation. In 2015, Tartaglioni paid a landscaper named Martin Luna to buy cocaine in Mexico and sell it in Florida. The drugs were sold as promised, the customers were apparently happy, and Tartaglioni quickly sent Luna back to Mexico with $200,000 for another shipment of the product. This time, Luna returned to New York empty-handed, claiming that the dealers he paid ran off with the money and never actually gave him the drugs. One day in April 2016, Tartaglioni, Benderoth, and Biggs lured Luna to a bar to discuss the potential job opportunity. Luna brought along some of his nephews, Miguel Luna and Urbano Santiago, and a family friend named Hector Gutierrez. As soon as the men entered the bar, they were ordered to get on the floor at gunpoint and were bound with duct tape. Tartaglioni tortured Luna and strangled him to death with a zip tie while forcing his nephews to watch. He then loaded the body into his truck and drove to his property while his associates transported the 3 other captives. Santiago, Gutierrez, and Miguel were ordered to their knees, shot dead and buried at the remote wooded site. While the murder of Martin Luna was planned, the other 3 men were just collateral damage. They were not involved in the drug activities and just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. 8 months later, the FBI charged Tartaglioni with 17 counts, including murder, kidnapping, and a handful of drug and gun charges. He famously shared a cell with Jeffrey Epstein, who accused Tartaglioni of assault. Agents pulled Benderoth over in 2017, but he took his own life before they could apprehend him. Biggs was arrested only a few months later. Facing the same charges as Tartaglioni and a potential life sentence, Biggs decided to cooperate in hopes of possibly seeing freedom again in his lifetime. Because Tartaglioni maintained his innocence and Benderoth was dead, authorities had no choice but to go by Biggs' version of events. He promised to be truthful under the condition that he would face a life sentence if caught in a single lie. Biggs admitted to shooting one of the victims and pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including murder. He is currently awaiting sentencing and could still face life in prison despite his cooperation. Tartaglioni's lawyers argued that their client was set up by his associates as a fall guy and that he was not involved in the murders. Unswayed by the defense's claims, a jury convicted him on every count. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty though, which means he'll likely face life behind bars when sentenced in October 2023. Number 13. Andre Reddit. After being handed divorce papers in January 2023, a 27-year-old police officer from St. Gabriel, Louisiana named Andre Reddit began stalking his estranged wife. On March 1st, someone entered the woman's home and fired several rounds at an overnight visitor, 26-year-old National Guardsman Dylan Martin. The victim died thanks to his injuries. Shortly after the fatal shooting, Reddit showed up at a nearby hospital with a stab wound authorities believe he sustained During the attack, he was placed on administrative leave and charged with second-degree murder, stalking and obstruction of justice in connection to both the shooting and a previous incident in which he allegedly stalked his ex-lover. According to police, Reddit and his estranged wife had temporary restraining orders against one another at the time of the shooting. Shortly afterwards, his wife filed for a permanent restraining order and chose to move forward with charges from prior incidents with Reddit. Number 12. Virginia cops face murder charges. In early March 2023, officers with the Henrico County Police Department in Virginia responded to a call from a civilian about their neighbor. After discussing the matter with the man, 28-year-old Irvo Noel Otieno, officers concluded that the call was mental health related instead of criminal and left without making any arrests. The next morning, police responded to another call about a suspected burglary involving Otieno. This time, they placed him under an emergency custody order, which is used when someone seems to be having a mental health crisis, and took him to a hospital. While there, Otieno allegedly became assaultive toward the officers and was taken to a local jail, booked on charges of assaulting an officer, disorderly conduct, and vandalism. 3 days later, he was transferred to a state hospital. During the intake process, multiple officers and hospital employees had to pin Otieno to the floor, despite him being shackled and handcuffed. Footage of the incident revealed that Otieno was restrained for about 20 minutes, spending much of it face down on the floor. At some point, staff members realized that Otieno had actually gone limp. They tried to resuscitate him, but he never regained consciousness and ultimately passed away. An autopsy concluded that Otieno had been asphyxiated. 7 deputies, Randy Boyer, Dwayne Bramble, Jermaine Branch, Bradley Diss, Tabitha Levere, Brandon Rogers, and K.L. Sanders, are now facing second-degree murder charges for what the prosecution has described as a smothering death. 3 hospital workers were also charged in connection to the incident. Lawyers for Otieno's family have described the tragedy as yet another case of law enforcement excessively restraining someone in mental distress who was subjected to malicious treatment when he really needed compassion and medical help. The case is ongoing, but what are your thoughts? Number 11. Eric Bennett. In January 2023, law enforcement in Monmouth County, New Jersey, arrested 46-year-old Seabright officer Eric A. Bennett for allegedly stalking his recent ex-girlfriend. The couple had broken up just 2 months earlier after dating for a short time. According to a criminal complaint, Bennett showed up uninvited at the woman's home days later and threatened to hurt her. The alleged victim installed security cameras at her home and blocked Bennett from contacting her after this. But about a month later, she started to get threatening messages on social media from an unknown user. A few days after that, someone slashed all her tires, keyed the side of her car, ripped a flagpole off her house, and tore down her security cameras. Investigators were able to put Bennett near the woman's house at the time of the vandalism, and they also discovered that he had used police computers to research the woman and people in her life over 30 times. During one incident, he allegedly threatened to harm the victim with a knife. When questioned by his supervisors, Bennett admitted to taking down her security cameras so he wouldn't be seen slashing her tires. Bennett was hit with a list of charges, including pattern of official misconduct, 2 counts of official misconduct, 2 counts of computer theft, criminal mischief, making terroristic threats, cyber harassment, hindering apprehension, identity theft, and stalking. He was suspended from the force without pay and held in jail pending the next step in his case. Number 10. Wayne Couzens. 33-year-old Sarah Everard was walking home from a friend's house in London one night back in 2021 when Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Couzens falsely arrested her for violating COVID-19 regulations. But instead of taking Sarah to the police station like she expected, Couzens drove her straight to the remote outskirts of Dover, where he proceeded to brutally assault and strangle her to death with his police belt. He then set her body on fire and fled the scene. After being implicated in the crime based on surveillance footage, Couzens claimed that an Eastern European gang forced him to commit the crime. As he awaited trial for Sarah's murder, his arrest triggered widespread outrage toward the Metropolitan Police for missing multiple warning signs that many believe could have prevented the deadly assault from ever taking place. Included among these red flags were multiple indecent exposure incidents stemming as far back as 2015, 2 of which happened at fast food drive-thrus only days before Sarah's murder. Another complaint accused Cousins of stepping in front of a woman on her bike in a wooded area, buck naked, in 2020, when he was supposed to be working from home at the time. In 2018, Cousins apparently assaulted a drag performer, and on another occasion a prostitute stormed into the police station, demanding payment from him. After the murder, Cousins' wife was left reeling over her failure to spot warning signs that her husband was capable of unspeakable violence. At the end of the day, though, she was just one of several people who gave him the benefit of the doubt. Cousins pleaded guilty to Sarah's murder and was handed a life sentence, which means he will stay behind bars until his dying day. Number 9. Bobby Katz Jr. 26-year-old Jessie Davis was almost 9 months pregnant when she suddenly vanished back in 2008. Her mother found her son home alone and noticed the smell of bleach, instantly making her fear the worst. While Jessie's son was too young to say exactly what happened, he made some disturbing statements that suggested she had met her end with foul play. The Canton Police Department repeatedly told the media that it did not consider Jessie's boyfriend and the father of her children, Officer Bobby Katz Jr., a suspect in the case at all. But they turned out to be wrong, and answers soon came as the local sheriff's department and the FBI looked into the case. During the time Jessie was gone, Katz was already active on a dating site. He also avoided the press and only gave one interview, during which he wept and denied any involvement. 9 days after the young woman disappeared, Katz finally confessed and led police to her body. He was arrested for murder and aggravated murder the same day. During his trial, Katz took the stand in his own defense and claimed he accidentally killed Jessie by elbowing her in the throat during an argument after she bit his finger, causing her to fall backwards and die from injuries. He supposedly got scared afterwards, so he hid her body in the woods. The prosecution accused Katz of strangling Jessie to death in cold blood. Jessie's family echoed similar sentiments. In an impact statement, the slain woman's sister, Whitney Davis, accused Katz of throwing away her sister simply because she became an inconvenience to him. Whitney said that Katz was only sorry he got caught and that he lacked genuine remorse for what he did. A jury convicted Katz of both murder charges, which made him eligible for the death penalty in Ohio. He pleaded with the court to spare his life and was instead sentenced to 57 years to life in prison. Number 8. Blair Christopher Hall. In 2007, while renovating the bathroom at their California home, retired San Bernardino narcotics detective Blair Christopher Hall and his wife, Christy Lynn, were hanging out in their outdoor jacuzzi. After hearing a scream from the couple's backyard one day, neighbor Lindsay K. Patterson looked over a wall separating the properties. She saw Christy Lynn face down in her bathing suit and Hall perched over her with one hand holding her head and another on her back. Assuming they were just being intimate, Patterson quickly looked away, but she was unable to shake the suspicion that something wasn't right, so she looked one more time and saw Hall relaxing in the hot tub with Christy nowhere in sight. A little while later, Hall rushed his wife to the emergency room, claiming that he found her motionless in the jacuzzi after coming back from using the bathroom. He said he tried to perform CPR before bringing Christy to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. After noticing multiple injuries on Christy's body, including cuts, abrasions, and bruises, as well as hemorrhaging in the eyes and mouth, County Medical Examiner Dr. Mark Scott McCormick concluded that the victim had been forcefully drowned. Hall was then charged with first-degree murder. He denied killing his wife and received unwavering support from their 3 children during the case. Prosecutors dismissed his claims of innocence, though, and pointed toward an $800,000 life insurance policy as a possible motive. As the trial unfolded, media reports revealed that Hall's police record was less than stellar. After working as an officer for 12 years and retiring in 1994 due to a gunshot wound, he became the police chief of 2 Idaho towns. He was let go after being accused and convicted of a felony charge for embezzling $19,000 from a drug task fund, but managed to avoid prison time. The first trial for Christie's murder ended in a hung jury, but Hall's second trial concluded with a guilty verdict and a sentence of 25 years to life in prison for the killer. Number 7. Amber Geiger. Dallas police officer Amber Geiger just finished up her shift and was going home on the night of September 6, 2018, when she lost track of which floor of her apartment building she was on. She accidentally entered the wrong unit, even though the door was clearly labeled with a number that should have told her she was on the 3rd floor instead of the 4th. There was also a bright red doormat that looked nothing like hers, but she somehow didn't notice any of these things when she opened the door to see an African-American man she didn't recognize sitting on his own sofa eating ice cream. He was unarmed and not threatening in any way, yet Geiger still pulled out her service weapon and fired at him twice, hitting him in the chest. Now that the damage was done, Geiger suddenly recognized her mistake and called 911. It was unfortunately too late to save 26-year-old Botham Jean, who died from his injuries. Geiger was initially arrested for manslaughter, but the charge was upgraded to murder. In the meantime, protests broke out across the US over the numbers of unarmed black men that were dying by the hands of police. Geiger argued that she believed she was at her apartment and simply mistook Jean for an intruder. Prosecutors accused her of missing multiple signs that she was in the wrong place since she was distracted by flirtatious text messages she was exchanging with her married police partner, Martin Rivera. When the shooting happened, the pair were caught up in a year-long affair and were in the middle of planning a rendezvous for later that night. The defense argued that Geiger wasn't distracted by the steamy messages, but that she was simply operating on autopilot and acting out of habit. Even if this were the case, the court did not believe that her lack of awareness gave her a good enough reason to open fire. Geiger was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her sentence is scheduled to run until 2029, but she could be paroled by 2024. Number 6. Kwaku Riley Agyapong. Known to the Ranlow, North Carolina community as Officer Riley, Kwaku Riley Agyapong responded to a domestic violence complaint at 33-year-old Juan Nikely Avalo's home in November 2022. Avalo was accused of assaulting and threatening his wife, who Agyapong stayed in touch with after responding to the call. When Avalo discovered Officer Riley's number in his wife's phone, the men decided to speak with one another. According to reports, Agyapong challenged Avalo to meet up and fight him at a gas station. Instead, he showed up at Avalo's house at 2 in the morning on New Year's Day, and the men fought it out there. During the altercation, Avalo stabbed the off-duty police officer, who, in response, allegedly pulled a gun and pulled the trigger 5 times, shooting and killing Avalo in the head. Investigators believe that Avalo had dropped the knife by this point and was trying to escape when he was killed. He was reportedly shot from at least 75 feet away, suggesting that he posed no immediate threat to Agyapong. The Ranlow Police Department quickly turned the investigation over to state authorities. Based on the evidence, they charged Agyapong with first-degree murder. 10 days later, Agyapong was fired. He reportedly refused to sign the termination notice delivered to him at the jail, where he's currently being held without bond. Agyapong was only on the Ranlow force for a little over 4 months, and it was already his second time leaving a law enforcement job. For just over 2 years, starting in October 2019, Agyapong worked for the nearby Gastonia Police Department. A school district spokesperson told the Gazette that he was accused of stopping a school bus from finishing its route while questioning the driver about a student's behavior. The details surrounding the incidents are vague, and a charge against Agyapong was not pursued. He formally separated from the Gastonia Police Department in April 2022 and was sworn in as a Ranlow officer a few months later. Number 5. Eric Bergen. 28-year-old Cynthia Kempf was managing a Safeway store in California's Bay Area back in 1998 when 4 men abducted her as part of a plot to get into the business's safe. After seeing a police cruiser drive through the store's parking lot, the kidnappers aborted their plan and instead drove Cynthia to a secluded field. They put a bag over her head, bound her wrists, and fatally shot her in the back as she helplessly laid on the ground. Investigators eventually traced the crime to 28-year-old Eric Bergen, a former officer who quit the force 3 months after Cynthia's murder while being investigated for police brutality. Bergen admitted to committing about a dozen unrelated robberies over a 5-month period after leaving his job, but a murder charge for killing Cynthia was dropped thanks to a lack of evidence. He went to prison for the robberies and was set to be released in 1994 when prosecutors finally managed to find enough evidence to indict him for Cynthia's murder. They did this by promising immunity to Mario Salguero, Bergen's co-conspirator in the robberies, who was also suspected of being involved in Cynthia's death. When he agreed to work with them, Salguero was serving a 17-year sentence for the robberies. As promised, he incurred no further punishment for the botched Safeway incident. Bergen's brother Carl also struck a deal with prosecutors and testified in exchange for a 10-year sentence, and a fourth conspirator, former Pittsburgh Police Sergeant George Elsie, was given 12 years. In court, Eric argued that he deserved leniency since everyone else involved in the crime received a lighter sentence. Meanwhile, Cynthia's family implored the court to impose a full life term. The judge overseeing the case acknowledged that the justice system can be unfair at times. In Eric's case, this meant giving two men a slap on the wrist and allowing another to get away with the crime entirely for the sake of securing a conviction solely against him. But that's unfortunately the way things go sometimes, and while the judge wasn't thrilled about how things turned out for Eric's accomplices, he saw no reason not to impose what he felt was a fair sentence against Eric. Bergen was handed 2 life terms, with the possibility of parole starting in 2017. His parole bids have been denied so far, and he remains locked up at San Quentin State Prison. Number 4. Josh Griffin. 26-year-old cocktail waitress Kim Medlin disappeared one day in 1997 while driving home from her job at a strip club in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her Jeep was found on the side of the road about 2 hours after her shift finished up. Kim's purse and money were inside the vehicle, but she was nowhere in sight, and her driver's license was also strangely missing. The young woman's body was found the next day in a secluded industrial area about 1.5 miles from her car. An autopsy revealed that Kim had been beaten, strangled, and stomped on, leaving her with multiple fractures and even a broken neck. There was also evidence that her wrists had been tied up, although the ligature had been removed altogether. Investigators quickly ruled out robbery as a possible motive. They also cleared Kim's husband, Bridger, of any involvement, even though a Monroe police officer claimed to see Bridger's truck in the area around the time of the victim's death. In fact, Bridger proved to be a valuable help to law enforcement by offering insights about his wife's personality and habits. He said Kim would have never pulled over for anyone except a cop, which could explain why her driver's license was missing and her Jeep was running with the driver's side window rolled down. A witness soon came forward and said they had seen a Monroe police officer pulling Kim over before she went missing. They were able to pick the vehicle out of a lineup, and shoe prints on Kim's clothing all led to the same suspect, a 23-year-old off-duty officer named Josh Griffin. His patrol vehicle was suspiciously clean, and his shoes were absent during an initial search of his house. Just 2 weeks before Kim's murder, someone had aggressively followed her on her way home from work. She reported the road rage incident to police, and the officers on duty urged their colleagues to keep an eye out for Kim's car during the morning to ensure that she was safe while driving home alone from her job. Prosecutors theorized that Griffin overheard the broadcast and decided to take an inappropriate interest in Kim. They accused him of pulling the victim over and killing her when she rejected his advances. Griffin denied any involvement in her murder, but was still charged with the crime. He soon changed his story and claimed that some drug dealers he owed money to for steroids offered to let him repay his debt by pulling Kim over and giving her over to them. Yet he was unable to provide any information about these supposed dealers, including basic descriptions of what they looked like. He also accused a fellow officer of being involved, but the co-worker passed a polygraph and was cleared. Meanwhile, several women came forward, accusing Griffin of different harassment incidents. The disgraced former cop was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He maintained his innocence until 3 years later, in 2001, when he finally confessed to the crime. According to a transcript of the confession, the murder played out as the injuries on Kim's body suggested. Afterward, Griffin tossed his shoes into a trash can, then cut up Kim's license and smashed a flashlight he beat her with, flushing the pieces down the toilet. Number 3. Patrick Ferguson. In early 2021, 30-year-old Robert Lee Howard Jr.'s girlfriend reported him missing in Memphis, Tennessee. The woman told police that she found Howard's phone by tracking its location, but Howard was nowhere to be found. Suspicion quickly fell on 29-year-old Patrick Ferguson, an officer with the Memphis Police Department whose ex-girlfriend had recently left him for Howard. Ferguson allegedly admitted to kidnapping Howard at gunpoint while on duty and forcing the victim into the back of his squad car, where he proceeded to fatally shoot Howard. According to police, part of the abduction was captured on camera. The scorned cop also said he got rid of the body in one place, but moved it to a second location with help from a close friend. 4 days after Howard disappeared, his body was recovered. Ferguson was instantly fired from his job and faces a laundry list of charges, including first-degree murder in perpetration of aggravated kidnapping, abuse of a corpse, and fabricating and tampering with evidence. He pleaded not guilty and is being held without bond. The case appears to be ongoing amid over a dozen delays in Ferguson's scheduled court hearings. Authorities also charged 28-year-old Joshua Rogers, who allegedly helped Ferguson move Howard's body, with accessory, abuse of a corpse, and fabricating and tampering with evidence. Number 2. Christian White. In May 2023, staff members at a nursing home in Cooma, Australia, called emergency services when they decided they couldn't handle a 95-year-old resident who was holding a steak knife. Paramedics arrived on scene first and tried to de-escalate the situation by asking Claire Nowland to put the knife down. But the senior citizen, who suffered from dementia, refused to hand it over, and when police got there, she allegedly walked toward them with the blade outstretched in her hand. 33-year-old senior constable Christian White tasered Nowland, causing her to fall backwards and hit her head. She fractured her skull and died just 1 week later. According to staff at the facility, Nowland weighed less than 100 pounds and relied on a walker to move around. She approached the responding officer slowly, and a female officer at the scene reportedly told White that she thought she could grab the knife from Nowland's hand, but White apparently still felt it was necessary to launch his taser. After an investigation, he was charged with grievous bodily harm, assault occasioning bodily harm, and common assault. After Nowland passed away, New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb said it was possible that White's charges would be upgraded to manslaughter. She said she refused to watch the footage of the incident until she was handed the final investigative report. A manslaughter charge would be grossly inadequate, according to prosecutor Peter Levac, who called for White to be charged with murder. For now, White is suspended as he awaits the next steps in the case. It wasn't the first time White's actions have caused controversy. 3 years earlier, he and a colleague were criticized for their behavior during a traffic stop with a man named Alan Watts, who was suspected of being impaired by drugs. In body cam footage of the stop, White's partner could be heard threatening to break Watts' legs if he tried to run away. While allegations against the officers for their conduct were dismissed in the end, Police Commissioner Webb said that White's history will be taken into account as part of the current investigation into the nursing home incident. Number 1. Kenneth Memola. In September 2022, a 53-year-old police officer from Hudson Valley, New York, named Kenneth Memola, was officially charged with fourth-degree stalking. According to state police, a series of complaints regarding incidents in the town of Middleton led to the arrest of Memola, who was a 9-year veteran of the nearby Montgomery Police Department. A criminal complaint said that he harassed a woman with the intent of causing physical or emotional harm. The final straw came when he was accused of approaching the victim outside a grocery store. Memola denied stalking the woman, who he claimed was an ex-girlfriend, trying to drag him through the mud after their relationship ended. Speaking with the Times-Herald Record, he admitted to simply crossing paths with the victim in a parking lot, but he insisted he was just there to shop and that the encounter was simply the result of bad timing. He said he approached the woman because he still had some of her belongings in his car and wanted to return them to her. According to Memola's version of events, she ignored him, got into her car, and drove away. The criminal complaint tells a different version of events, though. Based on video evidence of the incident, Memola was accused of waiting for at least 16 minutes before making contact with the woman in the parking lot. At the time of his arrest, he was already on leave thanks to an injury. His superiors decided that he would stay out of the job pending the outcome of the case. Memola told the Herald Record that he looked forward to proving his innocence and clearing his name one day.
Thanks for watching. If the area where you live was overseen by a corrupt police force, would you take a stand and speak up against their unacceptable behavior? Or would you try to keep a low profile and go the route of avoidance? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.